The goal of this podcast is to help you break in and thrive in advertising. And we do that every single week by sharing the stories and advice of those rocking it on the other side. This can help you break into this industry for the first time, mid levels to break through and find that promotion, or even you marketers out there that we know tend to drop in and listen to find their next agency partner. So, hello and welcome. This week, you will hear a conversation with Graham North. Graham is awesome. I was so pumped. We literally just got off the call with him, but he is the co-founder and chief strategy officer at Nice and Frank. He has a very unique path into this business, but really what we talk about is strategy and advertising and how Nice and Frank approaches it. Their model, how it's about being upfront with their clients and getting alignment at the very beginning to then do brave work after that. But he says it much better than I do in this episode. Other things. So strategy is a key focus here. One of his main takeaways is maybe to understand those basic frameworks as a strategist, but then don't be afraid to leave them behind and trust your curiosity and instinct. Fantastic episode. Nice and Frank, everybody. It's about 2 years old, 2.5 years old, and they are growing. Please check out their website, which will be in the show notes, to see the work and what their style is. Now, on with the show. This is the Breaking and Entering Advertising Podcast. And as usual, I'm your accomplice, Gino Schellenberger. Kick it, Mikey. All right. Graham North, welcome to the Breaking and Entering Advertising Podcast. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing okay. How are you, Gino?
Doing well. Where are you calling in from, sir?
Well, the okay bit is that I'm in Venice, California right now, and things have been a little bit crazy. Yeah, uh, a nice, a nice example of people banding together, I think, during tough times.
Yes. And for those that are listening, because sometimes it takes us a while to post, is January 9th, like right in the midst of the fires. Is that correct?
Yeah, winds died down overnight, so things are looking a little bit better. But scary, spooky times and orange skies right now.
Well, I'm sorry. Sorry to hear that. I appreciate you taking the time to be on the show. It
Of
means a
course.
lot to us. But we'll get into who you are, how you broke into this industry, and what it's like to be a co-founder and chief strategy officer at Nice and Frank. How's that sound for an overview?
Sounds perfect.
All right. And before we get into the story and the advice, let's get into some fun, lighthearted, rapid fire questions. Are you ready, Graham?
Let's do it.
All right. These are rapid fire. So, first thing that comes to mind, not a lot of thought. First question is, what do you think the best ad campaign of all time is?
Only because it lives rent free in my head all the time. I would say Dumb Ways to Die. And I don't know, it's
Mhm.
catchy, it works, it's delightful, and I
Yeah.
know way more than I would about train safety.
What's one word to describe the ad industry right now?
Evolving.
Dream client you love to work with.
My childhood brain says Nintendo. My other childhood brain says the NBA, which I worked on at GSP. Dream clients aren't always necessarily what they felt like in your head. I think actually right now, I'm from Canada, and there's a funny little brand called No Name, which is this like, yeah, kind of like low cost, basic, just pure value play. And
Mm,
given our philosophy at Nice and Frank on being radically honest, they do an amazing job of that. I'd love to work on them.
gotcha. And select one platform that you can only use for the rest of your life: TikTok, Instagram, or LinkedIn.
I think I'd have to say Instagram because, increasingly it's just like you can curate it in a way that has artistic value, that does have business value. My co-founder is constantly sending me unhinged Simon Sinek kind of like founder inspiration bits. And then, of
Mm.
course, mostly friends. I don't want to really connect with my friends on LinkedIn.
And last question here, not advertising advice related, but if you can talk to your 21-year-old self and give one piece of advice, what would it be?
Um, Risk is overrated. And the things that you feel are risky when you're young are much less risky than they are as long as you're just continuing to learn from them.
Love it. Love it. Appreciate that. All right, let's dive into it then. Graham, thank you again for the rapid fire. It's a nice little way to get things started here. But first off, tell us about you and tell us about Nice and Frank. How do you guys fit into the advertising landscape?
Totally. Well, so we're a little bit of a baby in the industry world. Uh, Started by my co-founder and I, Laura Petrocelli, in end of 2022. We were at Goodby Silverstein Partners together. But Nice and Frank is an honest creative company. Our entire thesis is that more honesty earlier in the process, especially upstream with like more C-suite alignment, can just get you to less friction and less BS on the braver creative side. Like a lot of times that great creative ideas die, it's not because they weren't great creative ideas, it's because you didn't have enough upfront alignment to like make that brave creative leap together. And so that's really the entire thesis. And we've been kind of going through the entirety of the creative process, the brand strategy process to kind of weed out bullshit. And try to get us to a place where we can have more honest conversations that just get us more quickly to bigger and better creative work.
That makes sense. I can see how that ties to the name, but do you want to expand on how you arrived to Nice and Frank as the agency name?
Well, it's kind of actually okay. So Frank was the original name and is the original thesis because it was all about honesty.
Yeah.
And we launched on LinkedIn. We have amazing lawyers, and they told us, yeah, there's like 60 agencies named Frank. They called it like sort of coexistence as it relates to sort of the legal term that it wouldn't be a problem because there are enough Franks in the ocean, I guess, to
Mhm.
support that entire ecosystem. Turns out, a few of the Franks were pretty upset that another Frank joined the mix, and so we ended up getting like three cease and desists. I'm staring at one right now that our team framed for us for our 1 year
Aw,
anniversary.
love that.
But anyway, so they were kind of like, you'd probably win, but why bother when you're just starting an agency? And then the irony of being kind of like student attacked, we realized it's actually it was a critical invisible value of the company, which is that being frank alone is not enough. Like if you just you've been in rooms where people are just firing off hot takes and not really listening to one another. That's honesty, but it's not productive honesty. It's not productive conflict. And so the nice part is about creating environments of kindness and psychological safety where everybody's honesty is welcome. So Nice and Frank ended up almost like rounding out the true value system of the name. But the idea from the jump was put the values in the name and then use those as forever filters of the decisions that we make as a company.
Love it. Makes a lot of sense. Yeah, just to be frank and without being nice, I can see that, there could be some issues there. So it's a nice
Gets ugly
tie in
pretty
there.
quick. Yeah.
Um, Amazing. So when did it launch? It was just over 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago.
Yeah. October 2022. Yeah.
Gotcha. An independent agency, I'm assuming, or am I
Yep.
incorrect?
Yep.
Nice, nice. So that opens a potential door. Talk about independent versus holding company. We can then talk about why you wanted to start it. Where do you want to take this? I think you said that you were at Goodby beforehand. Can you paint us that picture of where you're at in that mental space, right as you started thinking about launching Nice and Frank?
Totally. Well, I mean, um, for the listeners that don't know, Goodby is one of the most amazing shops on the planet, with a storied history, running all the way back to Got Milk and through, building a lot of modern iconic brands. And it's one of those places, one of those, lucky few places where the talent and the kindness are just there in spades, and it's always there. It, there are some holding company things. It's an Omnicom agency. We all know the state of the merger and stuff like that, and it can just affect I think like ability to change the conditions where some of the creativity thrives at its best. So, a lot of times we talk about how burnout isn't just hours worked, although there's some serious examination that needs to happen on how many hours we need to be working in this industry. But a lot of times burnout is just, you know, trying the same way to solve a problem and feeling broken in by like the system around you that's just not letting you do your best work. And so I think that where we had gotten to was we'd done a lot of really interesting work around this thing that I'd started at GSP called Brand Camp, which is essentially this kind of C-suite therapy that got to the honesty more quickly. We started to realize like that actually you can start to apply a lot of those principles of like nudging more honesty, nudging more bravery, having more honest conversations across the board in any meeting. And I think that that was, in the service of like when you're thinking about leaving, the idea of creating a system that changes it, not just creating better work or like jumping and doing the same thing all over again, but actually being like, okay, how do we like radically interrogate the system of how work gets made at every step of the way? And that's the power of being an indie is like, oh, you don't like how things are working? It's your fault. Like just change it. And I think that's one of the things that we're really trying to empower, like not just Laura and I and our president Tamara, but actually the entire organization to be like, oh, just raise your hand. If it's not working, say that it's not working and we can just change it and fix it together. And I think that's one of the greatest strengths of being an indie.
Love that. So you started this brand camp at Goodby, which
Mhm.
was to do what? What was the goal of that when you were working there?
It was like, I mean, it was like in terms of like breaking into the industry, I think it's a fascinating like case study because I'd come in from the startup world. Before that, I'd started a failed ed tech startup. And but the biggest thing is when I came in as a planner, we weren't working with any startups. Like we're in the heart of San Francisco, and there's obviously just like this was in 2014, so just like all kinds of really amazing tech startups. Obviously, from a price standpoint, a lot of the big agencies they're just not set up for that, but they're also just not working in the same way that we traditionally work with. Clients at bigger shops. And so I started this. It was basically like it was kind of a mess. It was like a brand hackathon. It was like on the weekend we gave people vacation lieu days to show up. So it's of course just like a ragtag squad. It was six startups with their founders, and then we just built ragtag teams of copywriters, art directors, strategists, EAs. Like it was a mess, and there was no real structure except that you had to work with the founders, sit with them, be in the mess with it, and kind of give them a new brand platform over the weekend. And then
Love
you'd pitch those to the founders of the agency, some Google Ventures folks, whatever. And so, for the most part, as you can imagine, it's like chaos. There's no research. It's like it was a lot of work that got done, but I mean, the real benefit of it was the deep time spent with the founders, just hashing it out. The thing that
it.
we kind of forget is important to just sit there and have the conversation. And so the evolution of that at Goodby became okay, that part's really valuable. And I was working on Cisco at the time, so we started doing it with Cisco as a bigger brand. But it was just like, okay, we need a little bit more research to ensure that the conversation, that if we get through trade-offs and alignment, it's actually rooted in something real. So then we added a lot more internal, anonymized one-on-ones with folks at the company, a lot of rigorous consumer research.
Nice.
And then once you start having that stuff, you're making real trade-offs together that are informed, and that productive debate gets you to an aligned place, and then you can go and run. But that was kind of the thesis, and it eventually became an offering that GSP still runs.
Nice, nice. So you built was Brain Camp your brainchild, and then like, did you own it or was it owned by Goodby?
So it was my brainchild at Goodby,
Yeah,
like while
within
working
their
at Goodby.
sure.
I left and ran sort of just a one-person consultancy where I was doing it for a bunch of different startups for a few years. It just really helped with the speed of like test and iteration, like where are you pulling inspiration from in terms of making the thing better. And then I came back actually to Goodby and ran it for 3 years as a standalone
Cool.
business unit and had a team around it. And then when we left was it was the ideology I think was very much the seed for Nice and Frank. But yeah, they still run it now.
It's a good reminder to the aspiring entry level professionals as they're learning the fundamentals and they're getting out there and getting experience. You can have in the back of your mind these entrepreneurial ideas, and this industry is pretty good at accepting those, implementing those, and fostering your entrepreneurial ideas. Uh, like with
Totally.
Breaking Entering was an incubator, I guess. I was able to grow it while working in this industry, and there's a lot of amazing people that want to help out too. So both that brand camp and then Breaking Entering are good examples of that.
100%. And I think like, it just reminds me too, like we dramatically underestimate the power, the transformational power of a beginner's mindset. Like so often it's easy to come into a place and say, and it is important to have the humility of like, I don't know anything and everybody teach me everything. But also, they don't have the power of seeing the things that you see. And so when you come in, you can see the things that are working, you can see the things that are broken, and you can ask dumb questions because you are kind of doe-eyed and just,
Mhm.
looking around. So I think that's one of those like recommendations for folks. Like, it's less about obviously like getting into the industry, but once you're in, leveraging that superpower of asking dumb questions, writing down those things, identifying those problems, then all of a sudden you can come in with a sharper point of view than people who've um, almost, I guess, like normalized or like a lot of those things become wallpaper for people who've been working in it for a long time and they
Yeah.
forget, oh yeah, that's a fundamentally solvable problem. And I
I
think,
think
anyway,
I
it's a
th-
really good point.
I think there's an approach too, because I've done this. I've seen other people, and I'm sure you've seen this too. This industry has a lot of creatives, and they have these ideas, and they might um, spout them out about how things should be done with, or just identifying issues within an agency or within the structure. And where I think a good piece of advice would be, craft a plan, a solution, and be willing to build it if you bring up that problem and you keep vocalizing or complaining. Be ready for them to turn around and say, okay, do it. Here's the resources, figure out the team, let us know, build a project plan to get this thing launched. I think that, what do you think about that?
No, I couldn't agree more because it's like, I mean, one, as a rule, be accountable for your complaints. I think like we have it's an industry of you know, opinionated people.
Sure.
That's a fact, But I think the people that are most successful, that are the best teammates, complain about something and then they go and try to solve it,
Right.
And I think that like that's the ideally with something like an entrepreneurial startup like that, which both of these were fundamentally, they're almost startups within, you identify the problem and instead of venting about it or having like a one-off idea that kind of like sort of fizzles in, these are buildings that are just filled with 1,000 ideas a day, and so
Mhm.
it can evaporate very quickly. But to your point, I mean, at that point you actually take cues from the startup world more than you take ideas from the agency world, and you say, okay, like, well, what is the problem, who's experiencing it, what's the impact of that problem, what's the thesis for change, what would it actually look like? And to your critical point, like, if it's something bigger like this, if it's a fundamental shift in the thing, be willing to change your job description to like work around it. I was a
Mm.
strategist who became the head of brand camp, and that was because this problem was exciting and important enough to me to pursue full time. And I think there's not, I mean, that's the one downside sometimes of being in an agency is that the uh, trajectory of growth can be a little bit murky, and so people just rely on, you know, win the Lion, win the Effie,
Mhm.
win the awards, stay on that path. And these feel like side projects. But in an industry that's in kind of dire need of creative reinvention right now, this entrepreneurial mindset, I think, is completely underrated. And we've been trying to hire folks that embody that over at our shop.
Love that. Love that. So then you brought it back. You ran it at Goodby for a couple of years, found some success on it. You were probably testing your theory or your hypothesis of nice and frank. I'm assuming from that, like you started getting some ideas there. So when does that come into play that I can do this? Like I should do this with it on my own.
I mean, it's funny because the brand camp thing works very well. We, you tweak anything over the, if, over 8, 9 years, then you get pretty sharp at solving that problem, especially if it's a less solved problem. So I think that thesis had been proved out. Um, I think the thing that we hadn't proven out that is Laura's superpower is she is a, ridiculously honest person. She's from Melbourne, and her delightful and unhinged Australian accent can make hard truths seem pretty palatable in a way that I could not. But her biggest thing was, you know, how do you make the jump from the work? Because I guess like the one downside that we had been experiencing in brand camp was, okay, it worked. We were getting to, you know, C-suite CEO alignment on 5+ year organizing ideas. But a lot of times when you go through that pretty emotional journey of like making trade-offs, mourning the death of who we thought we were in the service of where we're going to go, the first thing you want to make isn't an ad. And so we had this question of just like, okay, like, you know, what do you make after you get to that alignment, and how does that eventually impact the creative work? And what you realize is that it changes every time depending on the needs of the organization. And like, okay, like if we now all agree that we believe blank, it essentially becomes an audit for where are we not that in the organization? How do we root that out? Now, some organizations, all we're doing is identifying who they already are and re-articulating it, getting alignment. You can go make an ad off of that because it's like,
Sure.
hell yeah, that's the best way to play it. Other times we'd have to go through and actually like do the socialization work. So I think where it started to become interesting is, okay, this is more than just a project-based upstream brand therapy exercise, and it's actually a philosophy for reinventing every single step and thinking about what does that mean for organizational transformation, design, activations versus, film, all of that kind of stuff. And so start founding the agency with a strategist and a creative, I think was really critical, because we can be in a constant tug of war as to where's the value and where's the
Mhm.
potential for transformation. But you have to be aligned at the values level, and that's to have found someone who is as kind and honest as her was, I think, a very lucky thing. And then we get to play the dance of where can the value be after that.
Incredible. Yeah. I love the point that that you made about once you have those exploratory calls or you dive in deep, understand the alignments, you reposition potentially, or that transformation is clearly identified. The last thing they might want to do is create an ad. And I think that's so
Totally.
great. As especially as those that are creating spec work and trying to break into this industry. Like maybe it's not about just creating simple print ads. Like maybe there's other partnerships that they can have or create a new product or, think bigger than just those basic ads, I think is a good takeaway.
I couldn't agree more, because it's like, honestly, when I mean, I'm obviously on the strategy side, so I'm predominantly hiring young strategists. Um, so the book looks different, because the thing is that, how many people say they built Slack's brand or whatever. Like you never, the attribution of great work gets a little bit muddied. Um, but it's really, how do you think? And I think that for me, a lot of times, especially with strategists, but even increasingly with creatives, it's how well do you actually understand the problem that you're trying to solve here? Like it is important. It's incredible. I mean, if you're not having fun in this industry, then you shouldn't be in it. That's a fact. But then you want to balance that fun with an understanding of the business problem, where you would come and say, this isn't just the best film script that I could have made in terms of spec work for this, but that I can, you know, look at this brand, look at the context in which it exists, look at why it's not doing as well as it should, look at its secret superpower, and therefore recommend this unexpected action that's going to draw
Mhm.
attention and change perceptions or whatever. And I think that, then you add the layer of craft of, was it a great line or was it an amazing insight? But my ability to quickly draw your understanding of the business problem to the idea that you came up that's going to solve it is so important. Because honestly, the industry right now is under a bit of scrutiny, where we've been guilty in the past of doing things that make us laugh, or that, we always joke, um, send the creative team to Shutters to have a few nice days on production. when that's not necessarily, the value that's being added. And so, yeah, just being able to see that people have an instinctual mindset of how to creatively solve the problem is a
Right.
really powerful way to break into the industry right now.
Right now, we have a brief out to all the aspiring advertisers. Maybe not by the time this post, we'll see, but it's how do you get people to go back to the movie theaters? It's for AMC,
Mm,
and we targeted like millennials and Gen Z who are watching Netflix and stuff like that. Like it's a really and we had like a pretty standard brief, and then Nils Leonard's judging it, and he's like, blow up the brief. Basically, what you're saying as well. Like, we want to see something that's big, that's like maybe change the entire business, like a whole business transformation. He kind of specified, so like very similar thinking there. And those responses, what people will come up with, I'm really excited about to see like the strategy behind it.
totally. Yeah, like 'cause, like, there's so many, and that's the thing that we spend a lot of time on is like, I think maybe one of the tropes of the traditional model, um, of advertising makes strategy feel fundamentally boring. It's kind of like, oh, like strategy is that thing in the way of the idea. It's that necessary step that we have to go through to get to this thing. And it's writing, a quirky little line on a brief that feels like a jumping off point. The truth is, strategy illuminates all of the different opportunities that we could have to attack this problem in completely unexpected ways, and often in ways that maybe have more white space for originality. And that way we don't have to be in like a film craft originality warfare. If you go look at like Cannes Lion, the number of folks entering for like film craft, it's just like thousands and thousands of entries.
Mhm.
There's not a lot of white space there. But if you go and you try to do something in a way that aligns with the problem, and it's an unexpected way, like what role do podcasts have, for example, to play in reframing the fullness of the sensory experience that people have when they go to the movie theater, for example? So I don't know. I think like spending a little bit of that, it's that whole, a problem reframed, is the problem half solved sort of thing. Having curiosity on the problem is just such a fun way to truly original unlocks that don't just rely on craft, craft, craft all the time. And then you get to add the layer of craft at the end to an amazing and original, insightful idea, and you're off to the races.
I love it. I love it. I want to get into how you got into this business. How did you break in? So we can spend some time there. When did you realize you wanted to make ads?
I mean, I'm a bizarre example. My early 20, most of my 20s were in the nonprofit and journalism world. So I studied, business in undergrad. I spent some time in Botswana, doing working for a nonprofit that, it was during the peak of the HIV epidemic. 41% of adults in Botswana were infected with HIV at the time, which is like an unfathomable number to even consider. And so we were doing a lot of like kind of like education using theater and sports to help younger people learn how to protect themselves to eventually like reduce the impact. And then I think just like the exploration got me into journalism, which is a fascinating analog, I think, for the industry around like that whole thing that we were just talking around about, kind of like curious interrogative problem solving, like kind of getting at what is this? That's like, so much of journalism is not even the quality of the writing, it's the quality of the questions that you're asking. It's the, problem identification and the sense making of
Yeah.
what it is. Um, but I ended up back in the world of education, did my master's in education, built uh, an, an ed tech startup coming out of grad school with somebody that I'd met there, where the premise was it was around the time that Harvard and Stanford and all of them just started giving their courses out for free online.
Mm.
Um, and our thesis was, damn, like there's so much free education online right now that our poor liberal arts degree holders who were graduated, they were smart, and they were still living on their parents' couch. They could probably top up their education and get a job. So we call it like the tagline. It was called Edfolio, and the tagline was "Minor in Getting a Job." And so we built kind of like curated playlists that we'd consulted with employers to talk through. And if you could complete that, complete the assessment, then you would get an interview at the place. Anyway, it's kind of a fun idea at the time.
Yeah.
By the time that investors got involved, they were trying to veer us towards just making it a giant internal corporate training thing. And we were like, I don't know, this sucks. And so I was kind of like lost at 28. And a friend of mine, I was kind of looking at, is it tech startup or is it, something else? And I had been a copywriter for a year in Nova Scotia, where I'm from. For listeners that don't know, that's like the deepest East Coast part of Canada. It's an hour time zone east of New York. Um, and I was honestly a horrible copywriter. Like I was just very like trite, and I was way more interested in kind of like what's the human insight than what's the great line. And I was just such a bad writer. And so wasn't really interested in getting back in advertising. And my friend was just like, honestly, you just got to meet this. You just got to meet this guy. My boss is insane, and he's this incredible person named Andy Grayson, who's the chief strategy officer at Arts and Letters. And it's just one of those people, like how much of your job is loving the people that you work for and with, and just going and meeting someone who's just so sharp but still so curious, like that balance. Like a lot of times we talk about honesty, and the power of getting to honesty as it relates to Nice and Frank is you actually have to have such an amazing balance of both confidence and humility, because you have to have the confidence to speak your truth. You have the confidence to receive it and not be thrown off guard, but you also have to have the humility to like listen like you're wrong and like change your mind or whatever. And this guy absolutely embodied that. And so I ended up breaking in, but they didn't know what to do with me because I'd never been a strategist. But again, you have all of these. This is and I mean, in terms of the practical advice, like getting outside of the job description of who you are and mapping your practical skills against the possibility of how you might break in and framing that argument. Because so much of the job, kind of like you were saying, if you had an idea for an entrepreneurial startup at the agency, how can you frame it? How can you build the argument? How can you build a narrative? In this case, it's of yourself. So I'm having these conversations. I have hot takes on how to change the industry or my value in journalism and startups. They're kind of like, okay. And so the way that I broke in, which is like maybe like a thought for folks in terms of getting people to take a chance on you, is I did a 1 week minimum wage, $15 an hour trial at Goodby. And they threw me on Cisco systems, which is just an absolute chaotic, like tech giant mess. And they were like, just try to add value. And so I went through, and it was just kind of like at the time it was the internet of everything for them. And I'm mapping kind of like what's the landscape of like a futurist mindset as it relates to tech, but how can it be practical for like Fortune 500 companies? And I was just like beautiful minding in a room in a dark corner somewhere, just like creating this like, and they kind of came in, they're like, yeah, okay, you're probably a mid-level strategist. And we just went off. That's how I broke in. But it was very much like one of those like, I thought that I should work there, and they kind of thought that I should work there too. And you just had to like almost like both lean in enough to create sufficient collective value to make it work. It was very weird.
It's incredible. It's incredible. I think knowing what you know now, I guess, what would you tell the aspiring strategist today to expedite the process, to break into a Goodby like agency, Nice and Frank like agency, like a powerful, big, big creative presence agency?
Yeah. I think like honestly, the biggest one that I just keep seeing is um I don't want to full blown say like ditch the frameworks, because as you're learning, it's incredibly important to be able to, really like look at and see things that reconcile problem and insight and idea and tension and advantage. A lot of the things that are really valuable, just don't allow yourself to become a slave to them, because I think a lot of strategists that I see falter a little bit just kind of come in, and it's, this kind of like anxious, like I have to write the brief or I have to fill the thing out. And the truth of it is like so much of strategy right now is so bespoke. It's like a lot of like these problems are like very different, and it's not the McKinsey, we have 21 different templates and it's all going to work. So that some of that works, in that world. But for a lot of this stuff, in a quest for pure originality, it's the softness of like taking it easy, being childlike curious, asking really dumb questions, asking really thoughtful questions. Like if you could just like go and spend more time listening to your stomach and having those questions. And then also within, kind of like where we are right now, question the parts of the strategy process that don't seem to be working for you. Like this idea, like a lot of the biggest danger of of the brief, which is an important tool, is that we treat it like it's the last of a strategist's job. Like it's like, congratulations, you've passed the test, gold star on that brief. And then you toss it over the fence to creatives who either do or don't love it, whatever. And it's kind of like, no, the brief is just the first thing. It's the first offering to show up to a creative team, to show up to the client, like to get in with everyone and say, hey, we've illuminated the paths, we've closed some doors, we've opened a few others. This feels exciting. But I think like that whole thing of leaning into the brief is only a tool. The frameworks are only a tool. The job is radical curiosity and the desire to like open people's minds to the potential of what might be. And I think shifting that mindset would be my biggest advice. I wish I'd gotten too faster. It felt like it took me a long time to get there.
No, that makes I haven't heard anything like that. So that makes a lot of sense. How can people reach out to you? If they want to work at Nice and Frank or work with you all, what's the best way to say hello?
LinkedIn for sure is the easiest one. I said that I know I killed it in our F Mary Kill of social media
Yeah.
channels, but yeah, that's probably the best place. And then honestly, our website, niceandfrank.com, it's one of those things that like, we were joking recently. In a job market that's hard to break into, it's annoying to say that we have one extra layer of what it's like to work here, which is like you kind of have to be a little bit more vulnerable, a little bit more comfortable speaking your truth, a little bit more open to the chaos that honesty brings. But if you do have that, then you're more likely to break in here with us and you're more likely to thrive. We are not a good place for what we jokingly refer to as like cave dwelling strategists, the ones who, take all of the insight and do the desk research and sit in and kind of ta-da with a brief. It's not really a good fit here. But I think if you go to our website, you see some of the work, you're going to get a real sense of the energy that would thrive here. But yeah, and then just reach out to me directly.
Fantastic. Well, I can't wait to see all the future success with you all. Please stay safe and where you're at, and let's stay in touch. Thank you again, Graham. I appreciate you.
Thank you, Gino. Appreciate it.